So I'm Ann Toback. I'm the CEO of the Workers Circle, and at the Workers Circle, we build a community through inspired social justice community inspired by our Yiddishkeit roots. And so much of what we do is connecting people to our activist traditions, our Jewish and Yiddish cultural traditions, and we have taken a number of trips. We have led a number of trips to Eastern Europe where we've literally touched our heritage in Lithuania and Poland. I've also had the privilege with the Workers Circle of being in Belarus as part of some of our trips. And of course, that won't be in the near future. But Lithuania and Poland is such a big part of who we are. So I am going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to our PowerPoint. Oh, no, that didn't work. Or did it? Are you seeing a PowerPoint? I don't think so. My screen share got paused, Danielle. So let's try this again. Let's see. Let me share my screen and Microsoft PowerPoint. Are you seeing a PowerPoint, everyone? Are you seeing a?
I'm not seeing. Oh, there we go. We got it.
There it is. It just took a minute for some reason. So I am going to start and talk about our travels. And just to give you a short background, this past May, we started a trip in Vilna, or Vilnius, Lithuania. We went from Vilna to Warsaw, and we ended in Krakow, many stops along the way. And I will ask everyone, if you can, please mute yourselves and know that we will absolutely have time after my presentation to speak to different slides, to answer questions. It's all been time to do so. So in front of you, you're seeing sort of a panoply of our group in the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery. In the center is a picture of us, which will also be showing again in the Tikachin synagogue. And on the right is us walking through Vilna. So we started in Vilna. Oh, let's see. And Danielle, I cannot read the chat. So if I see Phil has raised their hand, Danielle, if you can sort of coordinate, and if there's anything that can be asked, should be asked while I'm speaking, just let me know.
You got it.
Thank you. And this is Danielle Gold, who's the coordinator, the manager of our events, and she is facilitating all of this. And thank you, Danielle. So Vilna, which was once called the Jerusalem of the East, and was truly a center of Jewish life and learning and activity for hundreds of years. On the left is an aerial shot of Vilna. On the right is a painting, a mural on one of the walls in Vilna, which is interesting because this famous rabbi, whose name, it's not the Vilna Gaon, it's another rabbi. He's painted on a wall that once housed a series of schools, or gymnasia, they were called, in Vilna. And so when you walk around Vilna, one of the wonderful reasons we start in Vilna is you can really sense the place. You can sense the history in Vilna, the Jewish community, the majority Jewish community that once lived there. And they've made efforts to remind us of that community, now long gone, on the walls. And here is an example. So this is the Jewish quarter yesterday and today. And the two photos on the right were taken prior to 1939. On the left is a photo that I took this year. And I think because there was a lot of sun, it wound up looking a little black and white, but it's the same place. And I think it shows you how history really speaks to us and speaks out to us in Vilna. One of the highlights of our trip is we get to visit with Dr. David Katz at his home in Vilna. He has created a mini museum of Jewish heritage in his home. He is a very tall man, and it is reflected on the left, and he's full of life, and he's full of stories, history, and truth. I think David Katz is one of the truth sayers about the history of the Jewish people in Vilnius yesterday and today. And he, being in his home, seeing some incredible pieces of history, from prayer books to leaflets, political leaflets, to photographs of the heritage is a highlight, and really a way we connect with the heritage yesterday and today. The Vilna Choral Synagogue, which was founded in 1903, still stands and is still an operating synagogue, and that is something we see. A key part of the trip we take and will continue to take is connecting with the Jewish life that existed and dominated in Eastern Europe for 1,000 years. And as the leader of the Workers' Circle, immersed as we are in our Yiddish heritage, I've come to see how so much of who we are today has been shaped by that history. And too often, the Jewish community looks at Eastern Europe as a place where we died, rather than a place where we lived. And the goal of this trip and the goal of our work, and you don't have to go to Eastern Europe to understand the impact and engage in the impact of our Yiddishkeit heritage, is that Jews lived, they celebrated, they wrote amazing pieces of literature, of poetry, they wrote plays, music. We spoke out, we acted up. The Jewish Labor Bund is an example that it was members of the Jewish Labor Bund who also founded the Workers' Circle. We were powerful speakers and powerful advocates for social change. And all of this happened in 1,000 years in Eastern Europe. So seeing the history that still remains is a critical piece. And remembering that the people who were murdered in the Holocaust also lived rich lives. They contributed to our world, and we remember the lives they lived, not simply the way they were murdered. So here's the Vilna Choral Synagogue, and it's a place we explore and where, again, history speaks to us. And I love showing you that in the women's section, they've put a matzah machine that was used by the Vilna community. And these are some photographs, and a photograph from the women's section up in the women's gallery in that synagogue. The Vilna ghetto still resonates when you're there. And we'll talk a little bit about Warsaw, where because of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, at the end of which the Nazis literally burned the Warsaw Ghetto to the ground. So when we go to Warsaw, there's pieces of things we can tangibly connect to, but much of what was is gone. What you're staring at in the center, and it's also reflected on the sides, is the library of the Vilna Ghetto. And the Vilna Ghetto existed from 1941 to 1943, and the library was a central place for the ghetto's prisoners. And something they told us is that Gone with the Wind was one of the most checked out books of the library during that period. Talk about interesting escapism. The Jews of the ghetto had, of course, societies. They continued to learn and be together, and this was a real mainstay of their world. Right across the street from the library is this building. Again, these are two pictures, the same building. On the left, you see part of this building has been torn apart. In this building was a secret synagogue, and you'll see on the right, I've zeroed in on a Jewish star that was sort of carved into the concrete. Now, this at one point was part of a room, and it served as a central piece of the synagogue of the day. So that's still standing there. Another part of our trip, we don't ignore the fact that 1,000 years of Jewish life was all but there was an attempt to erase it entirely in 5 years, and that's something that speaks to you everywhere you go to, and we don't hide from that. Panari was a central space of the Holocaust by bullets. Many, we hear over and over again about gas chambers, different, concentration camps of murder. Prior to that, the millions of Jews were murdered by bullets in the Holocaust of bullets, and Lithuanian Jews were subject to this terrible persecution, this terrible murder. And Panari was a killing field. In the center here, you see what had been a pit with a piece of machinery in it. This is actually the site where the Jewish prisoners who had been charged by the Nazis to clear Panari after all of the murders had been complete, they kept Jewish slave laborers on to literally burn all evidence of the genocide. Well, these people were there, and at night they were in a sort of a covered section. They were put into this pit, and they dug out an escape route, and a number of them actually escaped. So this is also a space of resistance, and themes of our trip are really resistance, resilience, and our cultural heritage. And this is an amazing place, and you really can feel the devastation, you can feel this history when you're there. We also have, and this is something we did on not this trip, but the prior trip, we visited with Fania Borosovsky. Fania, may she live to be 120, is 101, I believe, today. And she is the last living partisan of Vilna. And this is Fania in 2019 in the center. This is her in the front left, seated in the front left as a young woman. In Vilna, she was imprisoned from 1941 to 1943 in the Vilna ghetto. She and another friend of hers were given the opportunity to escape from the ghetto and go to the Rudniki Forest Fort, where there was a significant partisan community. They did so. She spoke to us about leaving the ghetto on the day that they actually liquidated the ghetto. She was given some way to pass through the gate, and using her memory, walked from village to village for miles, and ultimately made it to this partisan fort. On the right, you'll see what is a partisan fort. It's really covered holes in the ground. In some cases, the Russian community, before Lithuania became independent, they bolstered some of these holes in the ground with concrete, and you can see it there. Here is a photo of Fania standing next to David Katz. David must be close to 7 feet. Fania, you see her next to him standing strong, and our group, and we had an incredible experience with her out there, and we sang the partisan hymn in Yiddish, and really, I see it. Oh, here is this. We had a recording of it, but here is just a photo of us singing, and we'll try.
If you click it, it'll play.
Oh, okay. Oh, good.
Ich will euch alle, wo sie seid zu Fuß gegangen, als da mein Weg, begrüßen euch.
I want to congratulate
We help
especially those of you who are so heroic as to walk that long trek in this wet, mosquito-laden land to be here with us.
How about if I came by car?
I want to share with everyone, in case you don't know, that the partisan hymn was written by Hirsch Glick, who was a young man, a poet, a writer imprisoned in the Vilna ghetto. Word reached them in 1943 of the uprising of the Jews in Warsaw, and he wrote the partisan hymn to speak to their resistance, and it's Zognit Kenmo. And one of the refrains is Mir seinen do, we are here. And it really was what was speaking to the fact that we were here in 1943. I think someone needs to mute, and we will remain here. We are here today. It was a battle cry and a message to the people who they knew would come after them and represent their values and their commitment to a better world. And that's exactly what we do. Danielle, if you could figure out who isn't muted, that'd be, I'm sure you're looking.
I'm looking.
So we leave Vilna and we move forward to Warsaw. And on our route from Vilna to Warsaw, we stop at the Tikuchin Synagogue. It's an 18th century Baroque synagogue. And what we learn is that, the Jewish community in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries were really they were hired by the landowners, the royalty of the Kingdom of Poland, to run their businesses, to oversee the serfs, to run the inns, which was a major, the bars, the inns, the different houses of residence, and so the ruling class needed the Jewish community's help, and while we weren't serfs, we weren't tied to the land. We had the ability to go from place to place. So how do you attract the Jewish community? You build major synagogues. You build places of worship that they want to go to. And the Tikuchin synagogue, built in the 18th century, is exactly that. It's a synagogue built to attract a Jewish community to Tikuchin to assist the landed gentry there. Something I want to show you here, I'm going to keep this up for a second, is that what you see, and we saw this in more than one instance, is major prayers written on the wall, painted on the walls. And this is because most people didn't own prayer books. Prayer books were very expensive. They weren't particularly available. So what you found was these gorgeous murals that were common prayers, so that people were able to pray and daven and they literally looked to the walls for those prayers. So it was really a very moving and gorgeous place, just steeped in history. And here is our group this year at the Tikuchin synagogue. And it's interesting. So we come from a place where we immerse ourselves in historic life to a place of incredible tragedy and death. And that's the Treblinka death camp. And for people who haven't been to places where there's been death camps and concentration camps and slave labor camps, the Nazis built Treblinka and killed murdered over 1 million Jews by gas. And at the end of that period, they forced slave laborers, Jewish laborers, to basically burn all evidence and dig to bury the entire site with grass, with soil. So after the war, there was literally nothing there. We went back, people went back, they did there was some archaeological work, not a lot, because of course we're prohibited from disturbing the sites where our people are buried. But we do have some records, and what was reconstructed was what you're seeing. On the left is a reconstructed place where the trains would have run, in the train station, where the Jewish victims would have been forced out of the train cars. And in front of you, you're seeing these jagged rocks, and these jagged rocks all have the name of a community that was taken to Treblinka and brutally murdered. And the whole site is really a site of reflection and memory and memorial. So we go to Treblinka, and at Treblinka and other places, we always gather and say Kaddish. We read Yiddish poems, English poems, and reflect on the losses and losses beyond imagination. We go from there. As you see, it's a trip that just sort of we're surrounded by so many different feelings, memories, experiences, traditions. We go next to Warsaw, literally a few hours from Treblinka. We're in Warsaw, and we call it the Phoenix City because after, of course, the Warsaw Ghetto, when the Warsaw Ghetto was burned to the ground, it was just rubble. A year later, there was the Warsaw Uprising, where Warsaw partisans, not non-Jewish, although some of the surviving partisans of the Warsaw Ghetto participated, had an uprising themselves. And the Nazis' response was similar to the Ghetto uprising response in that they bombed Warsaw, the city of Warsaw, almost into oblivion. After the war ended, and Stalin became the leader that took over, Russia became the overseer of Poland, and Stalin built something on the left. It's this huge building called Stalin's Gift, and it really dominates so much of the landscape of Warsaw. It's much like Stalin, something of a monstrosity. It's overly ornate, it's big, it's generally, it's basically an unattractive building. There's a love-hate with the relationship in Warsaw, but it's now the center of science and art and culture. And they have many performances inside, and groups meet, and it's a very serviceable building. But Stalin's Gift is certainly one of the key sites of the Warsaw landscape. And in the center is the site of Old Town Warsaw. Prior to the war, this was similarly situated. I believe it was built in the late 18th century. After the war, they could not find the archaeological papers of the old town were lost or destroyed. So I believe this is a 17th century version, and it's been rebuilt. So there's a sense of it really being a movie set. It definitely has an unreal sense, but these are actual buildings, and it's a very touristy, colorful neighborhood. On the right is the Hotel Bristol, and I put that in. That is an old actual building that was not bombed during the Warsaw Uprising, because it was used by the Nazis and the SS as a headquarters. Interestingly enough, it's become a center point where the Jewish community gathers every 5 years to commemorate the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And of course, the building predates 1939 and has been a central part of the Warsaw community way before, but this is where people stay and they congregate and gather. The Nożyk Synagogue is the largest synagogue that survived the war in Warsaw. It's an operating synagogue, and it is the synagogue overseen by Rabbi Shudrik, who's the great rabbi, the rabbi of Poland, Polish community's rabbi. It was established in 1902, and it still is in operation today. And there on the left is Rabbi Shudrik. In the center, you see, even as we visit, there are people using the synagogue. On the right is a group, again, a group of our people in front of the synagogue. Mir Zayin Do, we are here, continues to resonate on our trip. Ghosts from the past. So the Great Warsaw Synagogue, which allowed thousands to come and worship, was right outside where the Warsaw Ghetto walls once stood. And every 5 years since the starting, I believe, in at the 75th commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, a view of the Great Synagogue is projected on the building where it once stood. And I had the privilege of being in Warsaw this past April for the 80th commemoration. And again, here was this ghostly image of the Great Synagogue standing on the building, being projected on the building where it once dominated the landscape. There still are amazing pieces of our history. For the Okapava Cemetery, Jewish cemetery in Poland, still stands. And people ask every trip, I ask, how is it that this cemetery stands when the rest of Warsaw is gone? And there's different answers, including that it just wasn't a target of the bombing when the Nazis flattened Warsaw. Does someone want to tell me? Maybe there's someone who can give a better answer why it was. Is that someone trying to get in? No. Okay, but it still stands, and you can still see hundreds of years of heritage. And in the center is the mausoleum, but of course they're buried underground, of Eyal Peretz, Yaakov Dinizin, and Ansky. This is where they're each buried. And when you look closely at the top of this, of the mausoleum, you see each of their faces portrayed as an animal, as a lion, as different. Of course, human faces are verboten in Jewish tradition. So, but apparently their eyes are reflected. And this is a wonderful place to contemplate. On the right, it's actually right next to this mausoleum. It's just this perfect cemetery perfect stone of an example of a member of I believe it's the Jewish Labor Bund, and someone can certainly let me know if I'm reading it wrong, but it's an activist. It's someone who is definitely a revolutionary. And on the left is, I'd like to throw this in, it's my great grandfather's stone. And it's just incredible. We do have history there. We do have roots in Warsaw, all of us, and Jewish roots still stand, and you can still experience them. And here's more. This is our groups visiting the Bundist section of the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery. And you see on the right, this is Marek Edelman's grave site. Marek Edelman was one of the leaders of the ghetto uprising, one of the few who survived and remained in Warsaw remained in Poland, not Warsaw, but his entire life, lived for a long part of it in Warsaw. And he also, he spent his whole life working for peace and dialogue and speaking out against genocide. It's interesting, I see Miriam Fisher made a mark on mine. I'm not sure, and so I'm leaving it to Danielle to.
Oh, well, Linda, who's here, found the grave of her great grandmother there.
Wow. See,
yeah.
That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our lives are intertwined with this heritage. I don't want to exclude people. Not everyone, of course, comes from Warsaw or Lithuania, Poland, but I'm talking about the Jewish community, this idea that we have a continuum, and you can find this in other places, other cultures too. The idea is that we can deeply connect to our Yiddishkeit heritage in the place it started. So these are all, important roots. And on the left is an example in the Bundes section of of Michal Klepfish, who was one of the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and the father of our own board member and poet and scholar Irina Klepfish. And he was murdered by the Nazis on the second day, I believe, of the uprising. He threw himself into a machine gun nest to save his friends and from being harmed. And his memory continues to inspire us. And this monument was placed in the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery in the Bundes section to remember him. And there's other monuments of this sort to remember those whose remains we never recovered. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, there we go. I wanted to show you a little bit of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the 80th commemoration. In the center is Irene Pletka, who is an incredible activist, philanthropist. She has endowed a major part of the Poland Museum of the Jewish people and helps all sorts of Jewish communal engagement in Warsaw. She's standing with me in front of the first monument to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where the commemoration happens every year, but a major commemoration every 5 years. On the left is the site of Mila 18, the last stand of the ghetto uprising in a bunker under this site with the stones. Of course, they were the Nazis had breached their bunker, and many of them committed suicide rather than be taken and murdered by the Nazis, and others died by gas and smoke. So this is a very sacred site where their remains still exist. And you see the tributes that were left. And on the right is, again, it's by the bunker. It's a remembrance. And daffodils reflect, Marek Edelman used to bring daffodils to this site on April 19th of every year. And it's become really a symbol of the uprising, of the resistance. And you see both Irene and I are wearing these paper daffodils that everyone in Poland, they're distributed on the streets in Warsaw on April 19th, and people wear them. Another view of Mila 18, and on the right is the Natan Rappaport statue. It was the first commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and it stands facing the Poland Museum of the Jewish people. I believe it's Mila 17, but it's contiguous with Mila 18. So it might, I want to double check, it could be Mila 19. It was on Mila Street, and this is a huge bunker that was part of a network of bunkers during the Warsaw Ghetto period that ended in 1943. It was originally created by a group of smugglers. So wealthy smugglers built these intricate bunkers. Ultimately, it became the bunker that was used by the ghetto uprising. And right now, the government, along with some Jewish community members, are involved in an archaeological dig there to unearth really the remnants of how they lived. And they're finding all sorts of materials that really reflect books and even electricity. It was wired for electricity and water. Of course, it's done under careful supervision with Rabbi Shudrick. Should any human remains be found, they would stop the archaeological dig. So this is done with the utmost respect, and you really see this history, this dark history here. It's an incredible place. And right there, it's like I'm talking about a triangle of places. In the center is the Poland Museum of the Jewish people, where you experience 1,000 years of life. From you literally walk through the museum and you start 1,000 in the year 1,000, and you walk up and you walk through the museum and you see Jewish life in 1200 and 1300 and onward. the Warsaw Jewish community today is, these are photographs I took during that 80th commemoration. The Warsaw JCC, these are all in the Warsaw JCC, is a central place of Jewish community in Warsaw today. I took photos of a gathering where I'd say about 60 or 70 of us came. It was Shabbos, we sang songs, and Irina Klepfish connected with us on Zoom. It was just a wonderful communal sense. It was the most Jewish community engagement I've had in Warsaw, and it really was special and celebratory, and had a sense of a reconnect to the history and to the Jewish community of the past. And again, it's sort of you're going from life to the end of a period of life. Auschwitz-Birkenau, we do not take a trip without connecting and remembering the incredible losses. And so this is a photo I took of the entrance to Birkenau that certainly brings up terrible imagery and thoughts from all of us. And our group comes here having experienced the life to mourn the end and the terrible end for so many. The Arbeitsmacht frei is there. This is a photo I took. When we talk about resistance, I want you all to look at the B in ARB, Arbit. It's upside down. This sign was made by a Jewish enslaved Jewish laborer. He made the B upside down as a sign of resistance in the face of his imprisonment. So Arbeitsmacht frei, and it doesn't seem like the Nazis realized it during the course of the war. More images. We don't forget, this is the left are the train tracks in Birkenau that once brought people in, and on the right is a barracks. Now we go to Krakow and Kazimierz, a central place in the Jewish world since at least the 15th or earlier century. Kazimierz was the Jewish quarter. On the left is the great synagogue, one of the largest synagogues in Krakow. We actually didn't get to visit it this last trip because it was being renovated. On the right is a 16th, or I think it's a 16th century synagogue. And you see it's still active today. I took this photo in late May. You see a man davening on the right, very ornate, very beautiful, has been in existence for hundreds of years. Krakow, in addition to being this historic center of Jewish life, is also the center of the largest Jewish cultural event in the world now, the Krakow Jewish Festival, which happens every June. On the left, you see the Galicia Jewish Museum, and there's these paintings, these murals that sort of reflect this heritage. And a lot of people talk about this as a Jewish Disneyland because the Jews are not really present. There's a few hundred Jews in Krakow today, but these memorials to them, or these these murals still stand. From my perspective, it feels important that that our heritage is still there, still accessible to all of us. And the Krakow Jewish Festival is a wonderful way for people to gather and celebrate that heritage. So I love this mural on the right, and it's been there every time. And the Galicia Jewish Museum is a wonderful way to see signs of that life in the history and even today. And here is the central square in Krakow. The major building here is a 15th century marketplace, and it still is a marketplace now, mostly selling trinkets, souvenir trinkets, but there's a whole market outside, and this will be this is where our the Jewish cultural festival. There's always major concerts here. The Klezmatics have played. They often play, and others. This time when we went, there was a group of refugees from the Ukraine in the center singing and talking about what was going on in their country. I wanted to end with some fun connections, which is food. And the food, it's very important to me that we literally taste our heritage, and it's in abundance. So you see in the center, pierogi, on the left, you see pickles, and on the right, borscht. I mean, the foods in Poland so closely remind us of our Jewish foods, and we eat a lot of them, and a lot of it, and it really is quite delicious. Pączki is how they say donuts in Poland, and donuts are one of their, especially jelly donuts, stuffed filled donuts, are a national dessert, national treat. And of course, we now talk about sufganiyot. Now, sufganiyot is a Hanukkah tradition that comes from Israel, and it comes from Israel because Eastern European Jews who went to Israel brought with them that tradition of pączki, or frying dough and filling it with jam or jelly or cream. And so today, sufganiyot is certainly one of our, is something that's become yet again a Jewish food, and you can still enjoy it in Poland. And I wanted to end with a photo of myself last year making sufganiyot and bringing our traditions home. And that's really, let's see, did I stop sharing? I hope so, yes. That's really a major part of what we do is learn about our traditions and bring them into the present. And I'll also just sort of end with, when you look at things like babka is a quintessentially Jewish food. Chocolate babka, I would argue, is the most today. Well, when we think back to the heritage of our people, we didn't make chocolate babka. My great-grandmother would have had it in cinnamon, maybe some fruit. Today, our culture celebrates babka with the materials at hand, the ingredients at hand. And luckily for us, in my view, chocolate's one of those easy to find ingredients. So chocolate babka is as Jewish as I would say the cinnamon babka of the past. And at the Workers' Circle, everything we do is not just about connecting with our history, but bringing it forward. We're making our own heritage and traditions today, but all of them inspired by the people who lived in these places and celebrated and laughed and cried and experienced hardships. But we never forget who they are, and we constantly remember their many contributions. So that being said, and hi, Louise. I see Louise Pasek was part of our first trip to Eastern Europe together. And she's wearing our Mirzainen dough necklace.
I have a question.
Oh, sure, Helen, go ahead.
Yeah, I was at the end of your presentation, but I was born in Poland, so there is nothing new here under the sun. One question is that Krakow celebration is every year, or is it every 2 years? That's number one. Number two, the worker circle, like I'm a homebound senior, I'm sure there are many like me. Are there any kind of workers, well, it's workmen's, but now it's a worker circle, right? Any kind of Zoom programs, about history, about whatever, that I can partake by Zoom, or maybe it's a suggestion that I would like programs like that.
Yes. So this is Helen. It's great to meet you. First of all, the Krakow Cultural Festival takes place every year in June, usually I think it's the second week in June. We have programs all the time, all on Zoom, and you're going to get information, and hopefully you'll receive in email every Friday. We send out a list of all of our programs, and we have lots of programs.
So if I don't get it, who do I call, and what's the phone number?
Can you go to info@circle.org, or what's our number? I'm afraid I haven't given it out recently.
Okay, I'm going to give my number, and not only that, I'm going to one-up you. I'm going to give you my extension.
Yeah, go
So
ahead. Yeah,
you'll
I'm
really
writing.
reach me if you're on the
I'm writing. Yeah, go ahead.
212.
Yeah.
889
Uh-huh.
6800
An extension.
834.
And your name, please?
I'm Danielle.
Oh, Danielle, you're the one who sent me that.
And
Thank
can
you. And here I'm writing workers circle. So,
So we have dozens of programs, and we'd love to have you a part of them. And I hope you'll enjoy them. Almost all of our programs are virtual. I see a really good question here from Bob. How did you perceive anti-Semitism during the journey? The words we use constantly in our conversation. We travel with a scholar in residence whose expertise is on genocide and also on the Jewish community, the Jewish heritage in Poland. Tomasz Cybulski, who is a professor, has been a professor at at the university in Krakow. We talk constantly about anti-Semitism, pre-war, post-war, and we talk with the Jewish community and the non-Jewish community in Poland today about the Jews who continue to live in Poland today. The words we use over and over again, it's very complicated. We acknowledge that there is anti-Semitism in Poland today in different ways, in different places. Most of it is not in the form of physical violence. It rarely comes up physically, but it certainly is in the language. We actually had an expert who's been monitors public speech in Poland and then out beyond for anti-Semitic verbiage. We ourselves did not experience any overt anti-Semitism as a group. We do wear Jewish symbols. I've had people on our trip who wear yarmulkes. We're mostly in major metropolitan areas. There is Jewish tourism is rather popular in Poland, if you will. It's welcomed. I mean, I think there's a sense of sophistication that especially Israel is one of the major sources of tourism money for Poland. So we did not experience that kind of anti-Semitism directly, but we do have many conversations about what anti-Semitism looks like today. And most of it is around dialogue that happens during the elections. It's more, I think it's probably worth another program to talk about the very specifics. But I will tell you, we were perfectly safe on our trip, and I didn't, and I haven't heard of anyone experiencing anything overtly anti-Semitic directed at us while we travel. Oh yes, and so I see the current government in Poland is very right-wing. And has a law against accusing Poles. It's actually, I mean, yes, that law, which we talked about at length, talks about there's this, the Polish government is very sensitive to the fact that they did not build or staff, man the death camps and the concentration camps. If that's the law we're talking about, that we've had a lot of conversation about it. It might be worth another program. I mean, they don't talk about Polish collaboration, particularly when you go there. And that is one of the problems that the narrative that we talk about a lot is the narrative of truth and the narrative that's out there. The Polish government is promoting a narrative that Jews and Poles were interchangeable during the war, that Poles were in the Warsaw Ghetto, Poles were in Auschwitz, and Poles were, and Poles were murdered. Now, some of that you could say is true, not all. Jews were in the Warsaw Ghetto. Some of the Jews were Polish, of Polish descent, but Poles also Poles also reported Jews. Poles harmed Jews during the war, but there is a distinction to the Polish presence and the Nazi presence. We talk about on our trip that the entire country of Poland was captured by the Nazis, and the Polish people were enslaved. As soon as 1939, schools stopped existing in Poland. If you talk to Polish people, their grandparents now often were taken off to slave labor camps, but it was different than the Jewish story, and there's no question. So the government has created some laws to try and separate the narrative of their complicity in some of the in some of the actions versus the fact that they themselves were harmed and captive and enslaved by the Nazi regime. So it continues to be very complicated, and one of the reasons it's so important, in my view, for us to be there, experiencing, witnessing, is to understand the real stories from these narratives that are not truthful. And we work with some Polish communities on the ground to help make those distinctions and to work together. And my hope is that there will be a time when there'll be a different government in Poland who works with us to help recapture that truth and to be honest about those narratives. In the meantime, this government is also doing some of the things that to preserve our heritage that I want to happen, including doing that archaeological dig on Mila and making sure that our historic sites are preserved. So I want to continue that, but of course I want the truth to continue to come out and not to be coded by falsehoods. Yeah, the Jan Gross. Yeah, I see your comment, Camila. There's a lot of complex problems, and yes, Poland is very anti-LGBTQ+, and we meet with people. In fact, we meet with a lot of people from the LGBTQ+ community. Interestingly enough, along those complicated, this concept of constantly saying it's complicated. Warsaw last year had a huge LGBT gay pride event with thousands and thousands of people participating. It's a very complicated country, and metropolitan areas like Warsaw have an active gay community fighting the government's sanctions. I mean, the government has also taken over, has replaced members of their Supreme Court. So democracy is at issue in Poland, very much so. And while we're there, we connect with people on the ground who are fighting for truth and for democracy and against the repressive steps against LGBTQ+. And another interesting thing we saw was the treatment of Ukrainian refugees. Poland has responded incredibly welcoming to Ukrainian refugees, really in contrast to Lithuania, where you don't find a lot of them, and they're not welcoming. So we made a lot of contacts with people there, and the government itself isn't behind that, but the people have been advocating for that.
Can I ask a question?
Of course. Now, who's that? I'm trying.
You don't know me. My name is Mindy Reiser. I'm actually vice president of the Jewish Studies Center in Washington. And this is great. I've worked in Central Asia, but that's not exactly your terrain. In terms of the Krakow Festival, I'm very interested to know more about that. That's one question. And also any kind of Jewish education for young people in Poland, any after school programs in Hebrew and Jewish history. I know it's not a large community, but I'm wondering what they're trying to do there.
Well, those are great questions. So first of all, the Krakow Festival, I believe it's a full week. We meet with one of the leaders of it. We've met with the founder, who, by the way, is not Jewish. And his daughter is one of our, the operators of the on the ground tour agency we use. So we're very connected. It's thousands of people come. Its programs are offered every day. I have a feeling a lot of people, some of the people on this Zoom maybe have experienced it. There's music every day. There's a lot of fun programs that people take place in. There's a JCC in Krakow that gets involved. It's a whole experience, and it's every June. And we can certainly send information about it to all of you. The other question, which we do talk about a lot, is education. And there's, like, for example, the Warsaw JCC, which is it's at least 4 floors, has ongoing Jewish education for young people. There are synagogues throughout Poland, not a lot. You're right, there's not a big Jewish community there. But there are attempts at education, and certainly in Warsaw, there's, in fact, somebody who's connected, who helps lead our group, had started a Jewish day school in Warsaw, which has since closed. But there are Jewish programming and education for young people. There's also a group right now, just as an aside, that I've connected to, who are working with Polish young people. This isn't connected, it's just reminded me, trying to connect Polish kids with the Jewish heritage and Jewish sites. And they originally were looking for opportunities, and still are, to connect Polish young people with Jewish young people. And that's something we're talking to them about, because the Worker Circle has a college network. We also have high school kids. And the man who started this program used to be in the Polish parliament, and he's not Jewish, but he was so affronted by some of the anti-Semitic language, he felt that education was a key piece, and to connect the young people of Poland with a proud Jewish heritage, and also with what happened to those Jewish people, was critical. He also supports a network of Poles who continue to work on Jewish sites, Jewish heritage sites, to keep them from disintegrating. So we're hoping that the Worker Circle can use Zoom and maybe someday bring young people to Poland to make some of these connections. But you're giving me a good idea for another program, and I'll be in touch with people in Poland that I know, like even Rabbi Shudrick, to get more of a sense of some of the activities in educating young Jewish kids. Something I want to share about, people ask, what is the Jewish population? And I don't have the exact number in my head, but I know that there's, like, they talk about, it could be between I think it was 10 to 15,000 or more. A lot of Poles are learning that they have Jewish ancestry from these DNA tests.
Try to work on certain household workers.
But prior to 1939, and something we really learn and experience while we're there, is how quickly life went as a Jew from being in a free society to being a prisoner and then being murdered. It happened very quickly from 1939. Many Jewish parents passed their young children, infants, to non-Jewish neighbors. There was a lot of that happened, not enough perhaps, but there were certainly thousands of instances where young Jewish children were raised by their non-Jewish community members in their neighborhood. Today, and in many cases, these kids never learned they were Jewish or found out on deathbed confessions because their parents didn't return. People are learning now that they have Jewish backgrounds, and they're wanting to connect around those backgrounds. And so the numbers of people approaching Rabbi Shudrick and other rabbis and other JCCs, certainly JCC in Krakow and in Warsaw, are growing. as people. I noticed in the New York Times just yesterday, there's a story about these two people in Canada, these two men who were switched at birth by a mistake. And one of them was raised in a Ukrainian home. The other one was raised in a native home, part of the First Nation. But the Ukrainian, the person who was of Ukrainian birth, they get their DNA test back, and it was something like, it was a percentage Jewish, Eastern European Jewish. But they make it a point to say that the family itself was Ukrainian Christian. I think a lot of people from that era are finding out that they're Jewish. And so that's part of this resurgence or surgence of Jews. The university studies on Jewish history. Yes, universities do have these studies, and a lot of non-Jews are taking them. And some of them even, when we look at our Yiddish program. So I didn't tell you, I'm assuming you guys know, but maybe you don't. The Worker Circle offers over 50 online Yiddish classes a semester. We have 3 semesters. We're in the summer now. We'll have fall, winter coming up in October. We have young people from, oh dear, that's, my dog is returning, but that's okay. We have young people from Poland taking our Yiddish classes who are not Jewish, who are just immersing in Yiddish. There's a connection to our Eastern European heritage. And there's so many questions here, and I know we're almost at the end. Oh, good. We're going to share more information, and I actually think it's probably worthy of us continuing again. But let me ask you, Mitchell. You have your hand up. Why don't
Yes, I'm going to be in Vilnius starting on Sunday, and I was wondering if you had any other suggestions of must-see, whether it's Jewish or not Jewish.
Wow. So in Vilnius, for me, the highlight are touring all the synagogues and walking that area and experiencing a sense like just breathing the air, knowing that for hundreds of years, for hundreds of years, our own ancestors walked and celebrated on those lands. But I would go to that museum, the Galicia Museum. That's a wonderful place, and just walk around and experience it. I think that was really those are the highlights. And of course, that's also from where you go and you visit Auschwitz-Birkenau. And I will say to everyone, if you go to a place like Auschwitz-Birkenau, try to take a Jewish tour. If anyone wants us to make recommendations, we can maybe we'll send a connection to Tomasz Chabulski. That's our scholar in residence. He lives in Krakow, and he does individual tours. It's critical to be on Jewish tours, because otherwise you might get this narrative, this false narrative of what happened. And I want everyone to have the experience that we had. And
How far is Auschwitz-Birkenau from Vilnius?
It's about 45 minutes, and there are many tours that go there. But just be thoughtful, and we can connect you with him. And if you don't want to use him, he can connect you with people to make sure you get. He's an official guide of Auschwitz-Birkenau, so he'll be able to connect you well with that. And everyone, if you're planning a trip, we would be more than happy to make sure you're connected with the right people, because going back, touching our heritage, seeing the truth, bringing it back, sharing it is part of, I think, our charge. I'll end by saying I just gave this same presentation to a group of seniors at the Gerwin Assisted Living Center. And including in the group was a woman who was a survivor of Birkenau. And she came over, she beckoned me over and hugged me and said, "Thank God you're going. I'm so proud of the work and the people who would go and see these terrible places and witness for us and continue to tell our stories." So it was an incredible affirmation that as part of what we're doing. It's just, again, it's not just seeing the end, it's remembering that 1,000 years of life. And I think I'll leave it there, but we will certainly continue with all of you, and I hope to be in touch soon. So I'll say a schönen Dank and have a very sei gesund, and stay connected with the Worker Circle. We will keep connecting you with our heritage and our Yiddishkeit and our activism.